I'd like to object, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It's fine. Then you would destroy it.
Yeah,
I would like to politely go there and destroy your entire piece. Thank you.
That's how.
Hi everyone, so my name is Suchi and I'm this year's Kohn Lecture Coordinator for the Speaking Fellows, and welcome to our February Kohn Lecture. Thank you so much for coming. So first up we're going to have Andrew. Andrew is a junior, and majoring in philosophy. And so give him my hand.
Hi everyone. Testing? Okay, we're good. Alright. Alright, so hi everyone, I'm Andrew, and my topic for this Kohn lecture is titled To Assimilate or Not to Assimilate, a moral look at accents and dialects. So let's dive into what that means. So just to start with a few statistics to warm up your minds. In a recent 2024 Indeed survey about employees' experiences, 34% of black employees reported code switching, which was much higher than the average of 20%, and also the 12% white employees reported. Additionally, in a 2022 Forbes article, there are reports of studies who kind of deemed people with thicker accents as unemployable, less truthful, and felt the need to justify their presence in the workforce. Why is this important? This is because linguistic discrimination is one of the more acceptable forms of discrimination we still face today, and it only has been discussed really in the past decade. So, just to introduce myself, hi, I was born and raised in the US, New Jersey. My parents are both from Shanghai, China, but immigrated here for grad school. I'm a philosophy major, and I really do have an interest in ethics. One of my favorite shows is The Good Place, if anyone knows that one. I'm a speaking fellow, which is why I'm here today. And yeah, we basically tutor conversation practice, interview practice, anything school related with communication. I'm also a former president of the Asian American Alliance Club on campus, which involves political awareness and advocacy for APIDA populations. So that's like my qualifications. So to kind of divvy up definitions for some of the important terms I'll be using, linguistic justice and racism. First of all, linguistic racism refers to prejudice based on a person or group's linguistic traits. This can be either through spoken or written language, and also more minute things like tone, words you use, pacing, stuff like that. Linguistic justice, which was a term coined by April Baker-Bell in 2020, was a response to linguistic racism, which is, as in her words, an anti-racist approach to language and literacy education. A couple other terms I'd like to define are white mainstream English, which is, hence the name, the mainstream accent we use in America right now, and also has its origins with white populations in the country. And also linguistic assimilation, which is essentially assimilating one's own language to fit in more with the majority. So I'm going to make two philosophical claims about linguistic justice and racism. One's normative and one's descriptive. Can anyone tell me the difference between the two? I know there's some philosophers in here. Anyone? Okay, so normative basically means a claim about what things should be, or what should be the case, and descriptive is about what is the case in the real world. So first, my normative claim is, everyone deserves a moral freedom to choose whether to assimilate or not to the dominant accent or dialects of their environment without facing social or professional penalties. My descriptive claim is that in reality, especially in the US workforce, individuals are systemically pressured to assimilate linguistically, bit of a mouthful, which fails to support this moral choice. And I think these go hand in hand because without this descriptive reality I'm pointing out here, we wouldn't have to make this normative claim of, hey, everyone deserves the choice to not assimilate. So, a really good metaphor I've been introduced to and like to use is the linguistic key and door. Essentially, we say there's a door, which is basically a barrier for social opportunities, professional opportunities, stuff like that, where the only thing to enter, or the only thing you can use to enter them is a key, in this case being white mainstream English. So basically by assimilating to that majority accent, you kind of widen your range of opportunities. And this, this person without the key right now is Sally. We'll get back to them later. Oh yeah, and also I made my own very, very professional drawings. So some of my proposed solutions, especially in the US, for the short term, I would say let's hand out keys. That is giving people the ability to speak white mainstream English. I think this is more of a good for people to be able to communicate or to be more approachable and processable to people who are more familiar with white mainstream English and aren't familiar with this topic. However, I only think this is for the good if it's for the long term, which is dismantling the door, or that is moving away from linguistic hierarchies and eventually coming to a place where linguistic hierarchies aren't really in, especially for accents and dialects, aren't really in place in America. But we're in the real world, not everything is an ideal, so not everyone can kind of drop everything and participate in contributing to this moral goal that I've put in place. So I also want to make the claim that there's no moral failing in choosing to assimilate when important for survival. So a really key example of this is someone who's probably immigrating to the States, who doesn't have the ability, or has the ability to assimilate to white mainstream English, or has the ability to assimilate to the language, but if they choose to, they increase their odds of getting a job that would support their livelihood and like being able to support their dependents. I would say they should definitely take that opportunity to assimilate to get that job in order to better increase their odds for having a more prolific life. However, I do want you guys to think to yourselves, when you can afford to resist accent assimilation, would you? And my inspiration for this statement is from one of my favorite philosophers, Peter Singer, a lovely man on the right. He made a statement called "Without sacrificing anything nearly as important," which he made in terms of saying that everyone's obligated to donate. And I think this can be extrapolated to accent assimilation, where as long as you're not sacrificing anything nearly as important, I think everyone has a duty to maybe consider not assimilating to the majority accent. And yeah. So I wanted to get some of my family's opinions on this because I didn't want to be alone in this. And yeah, let's just see what they have to say. Oh yeah. What do I have to press?
Audio up at the bottom. Hang on, you don't take a look.
Sorry, yeah.
No, you're fine.
I think it was working before, right? It's not muted. I can't.
Hi Andrew, we are in the beautiful Buenos Aires to answer your school questions.
Hi, my name is Andrew Zhang. I grew up primarily in Westfield, New Jersey. When I was younger, I also lived for 2 years in Chicago.
My name is Sarah from Shanghai, China.
My name is Charles Zhang, it's Kobe Charles. We are from Shanghai, China. We grew up in Chinese, that's the official language in Shanghai, but I also learned the official language of Donghua in China. Particular accents, so we start 4th grade, we start learning English, the English style, so we have a British accent. Then we come to the United States, when I was 24, we grow the American accent.
My experience with my accents is that my kids always laugh at me when I say dog trumpet, and a tower. It's a tower and a dog trumpet. But that's the funny part, so I don't mind at all.
So my experience with accents is noticing that about a variety of accents growing up. My parents obviously wanted a very different accent having grown up in China and coming to the States versus my friends' parents who largely grew up in America, as well as even like in other languages when I studied abroad in Spain and hearing the different Spanish accents within that country and versus a Spanish accent that I learned in school.
I think the major essence is good, is that people can understand you and you kind of immerse into the local, part of the local culture, right? But here in America, so we adapt to their culture and we feel American now.
My perception of accents has changed over time. I would say in the beginning it was a bit tough. I think I just wanted to fit in as much as possible with the accent, with the words and the slang that I use to really assimilate into the community around me. But now I think I really just appreciate so much of like individual character and background and story that each accent tells about a person and kind of like the journey that they took in growing up. And I actually think like in America it's amazing to hear just so many different accents depending on where people come from and how they're just really be that melting pot of different cultures. So honestly, like I'm kind of a bit against assimilating to one accent.
I think it's good because the whole country, if they speak different accents, it's very hard for people to communicate each other. They should have one accent that people understand each other, but they should not eliminate the local accents to keep the local culture and custom. Okay, Andrew, hope you enjoy it. Bye-bye.
Nice. All right. So they're lovely, yeah. And technology. Okay. So yeah, just to take some key points away from my family's testimonies, I would say my mom believed that accent assimilation is good to be more part of local culture. My dad essentially said that accent assimilation is good so everyone can understand each other while maintaining local culture. And my sister was against accent assimilation because it risks erasing people's backgrounds. And just to engage in dialogue with these points, I wanted to kind of articulate some responses to them. So for my mom's claim, I would say this can be true, although we should strive for a culture to internally embrace this diversity, while also having people be a part of that local culture. For my dad's claim, I also agree that the ability to understand each other is very important, but ideally we improve people's communication without the need to erase accents. And for my sister's claim, just to play like devil's advocate, even though it is one I agree with, I would say this is a valid concern, although I could see how one could argue that assimilating is a vital part of some people's backgrounds. I would imagine if I asked my parents about it, they would say assimilating to America's culture, accent, and language is a core part of their identity now. And yeah, so I'm going to do a little thought experiment with you guys. So remember Sally from last time? So she's a mermaid, and she's from Atlantis, and wants to sell seashells on the seashore, and wants to basically get a job at a shell corporation to do that. However, she has her main accent of being from Atlantis, but has the choice to kind of assimilate to white mainstream English in order to better get this job. She has a pretty stable life now, but getting this job would greatly increase like her networking opportunities, her job prospects, and her livelihood. So what would you do if you were Sally? I just want people to chip in. I'll give you guys a sec though. Yeah.
I'd use code switching, so maintain like my natural way of speaking in social settings and in the privacy of my own home, and then in a professional setting, I would assimilate.
Gotcha. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Assimilate, but then sneak in parts of your accent little by little until everyone starts to speak mermaid.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I think these are both really good perspectives. Like, I think code switching is important to be able to like have a professional face, and also sneaking in bits of that are ways to kind of promote your own culture while also having this professional facade to yourself. I would say ideally, I would want everyone to be in a position where they feel comfortable just speaking in their native accent. It's like, oh, if they judge me for that, whatever, like that's on them. But this is also to reiterate the claim that in the current world, it's not the reality. People feel pressure due to systemic prejudices and just in environments to assimilate to the culture in order just to function as a human. So yeah, thank you guys. And yeah, what's the role of the Speaking Fellows in this? So yeah, us at the Speaking Fellows really promote linguistic justice. And one thing that really stood out to me while being trained for this job is that we don't promote accent erasure, and kind of at all. So I've had a lot of personal experiences in sessions where people, often international, ask me, how do I sound more like you? And this is often in the context of wanting to sound more American or just more white for professional context, social context. Even I had one person who just wanted to order from a restaurant but wanted to do it more like me. And I think what we all do and what I also promote is kind of trying to shift the perspective of I need to sound more white to, okay, let's just help you try to communicate what you want to say better without the need to, or without the goal of erasing your accent. Just finding other ways to kind of improve your communication skills. And yeah, just for a bit to reflect. I think everyone else should, if you want, excuse me, if you were to take anything away from this lecture, I'd like you guys to reflect on, what is my experience with linguistic racism, if any? Am I complicit in it? I think from my experience, I was pretty complicit in it due to my kind of K-12 upbringing in the States, where even though I was around, people who didn't have the key to the door, and I grew up having the key, I was like, oh, this is great. Everyone should just have the key, and then everyone's happy, and everyone's like homogenous and great. However, I do think now that I've been introduced to topics such as, linguistic justice through, Zach writing 105, Amy writing 247, I think these topics are really important to promote because I think me and other people don't realize how pervasive of an issue linguistic racism can be, especially in America. Yeah. And some future resources if you guys are interested in studying this. Linguistic Justice by April Baker Bell is kind of the pioneer text for this. It primarily focuses on K through 12 linguistic justice for mostly Black identity and populations. However, it's just a very good read to get well versed on this topic. Additionally, my friend Kathy, who's a writing fellow here and a senior, wrote an article with another university student focusing on enacting linguistic justice at writing centers like the one we have here. And a quote I really like from her is that, as higher education seeks to pursue positive change through inclusivity and diversity initiatives, their efforts must also critically examine the languages of marginalized communities which are relegated to outside of the academy. Thanks, Kathy. And yeah, so one last takeaway I want you guys to have from me is that the linguistic door should not and does not have to exist. Let's use the tools we have to tear it down together. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Andrew. That was amazing. All right, so while Caro's getting set up, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the Speaking Fellows. I know Andrew kind of touched on this during his presentation. Sorry. So basically, we are Speaking Fellows, and we are public speaking tutors on campus, and we help with all sorts of things, including class presentations, speeches, interviews, conversation practice, and we also host workshops at classes and for organizations around campus as well. So we're a good resource if that is something that you want to work on, and you can always sign up for a tutoring shift with one of us. All right. So next up we have Caro. Caro is also a junior. Oh. Yes. So Caro is also a junior, and they're double majoring in health policy and in Japanese. So please give them a warm welcome.
My Wi-Fi is not loading and Canva literally won't let me present. So is it alright if I just talk to y'all a little bit about myself as I wait for my slides to connect?
Yes.
Okay, Suchi said a little bit about me. My name is Caro. I'm a junior, and I'm talking about communicating across languages and cultures. And the reason why I decided, oh, I literally don't have my mic on. That's important.
Do you need my laptop?
That's a good question. Let me try again. Wait, no, now I can. That's crazy. Okay. I hope that works. Okay, so I'm talking today about communicating across languages and cultures, and it's sort of an intersection with linguistic justice, as Andrew was talking about, but rather than sort of the question of accents and whether or not we should assimilate, I want to talk from a more international perspective, and the reason is because I'm an international student, and also both of my parents immigrated here when I was a kid to the United States, and so I have a lot of insight in communicating with different accents and sort of working with each other to sort of create a collaborative team environment. So today what I'm going to talk about is two central parts. First is the science of multilingualism, how bilingualism works in the brain and what the strengths and weaknesses are of that, and how we can grow stronger from that as bilingual and monolingual people. And then I want to talk about cross-cultural communication, the elements that can help build a teamwork, a team of diverse people to have stronger communication, but then also some of the breakdowns that we have. And then if y'all are open to it, we can also do an activity where we practice the tips from cross-cultural communication and apply them to scenarios that we faced in the past where there were communication breakdowns. So, to start off, the science behind bilingualism and multilingualism. Anyone here, raise your hands if you guys speak more than one language, just to get a sense. Okay, hi guys. I'm going to speak from the perspective as a bilingual Spanish speaker, but the science I'm going to talk about did all sorts of investigations with Russian and English, Chinese and English, to sort of give background. So one of the first concepts in order to understand what we're going to talk about is that the brain doesn't turn language on and off. When you're speaking in English and then you switch to another language, you still are thinking in English as well. What's happening is that your brain is actively trying to control its linguistic ability to focus on one thing. So it's not a switch. And then we don't hear words all at once, we hear them sequentially. I'll dive into this a little bit more later, but if we're speaking in English and I start a word with can, your brain is immediately going to start trying to beat me to guess, okay, well, what word could possibly start with can? How can I beat you in guessing it? So your brain might go candle, candy. When you speak multiple languages, you're not just looking at the English ones or whatever language you're actively using. Your mind is thinking about all sorts of words in any language that you know that starts with can. And we'll dive in a little bit more about that, but that's called language co-activation. It's pretty neat. I read all about language co-activation in The Power of Language by Viorica Marian. I really recommend it if you guys are interested in sort of like linguistics for dummies, because I'm not a linguistics student and I really enjoyed it. But basically she talked about some really amazing research they did with eye tracking technology that asked monolingual English speakers and then English and then a different language here, it's Spanish-English bilinguals, to look at different images and track the likelihood of their eyes moving to a certain image. They would have controls and then they would have like purposefully tricky ones depending on the languages being involved. So if we look at the first image at the top with the flies, those two, if the participant is asked to look at the word fly, an English monolingual, because they're hearing sequentially, would hear the FL and maybe look at flag more often than any of the other images. But if you asked a Spanish-English bilingual and you said, please look at fly, their mind might start thinking, okay, fly is mosca, mosca molino, molino in English is windmill. And so there's a higher likelihood that their eyes will dart to windmill first. That's language co-activation. It doesn't just happen with the sequential. Sometimes bilingual minds will want to stop for a second because they need to translate it to English if the other language is a stronger language. And then in that same experiment, they supported it with other no competition or competition experiments. So like we talked about candle and candy for monolinguals. And then, for example, candle and lock, because lock is candado in Spanish. People are more likely to look at candado because they're hearing the can and they're thinking, oh, candado, that's lock. So that's the really awesome language co-activation research that got me interested in talking about cross-cultural communication and how the bilingual and multilingual mind works. But I wanted to dive in a little bit about the repercussions of linguistic competition to be able to tie that into communication. So linguistic competition can have quite a few difficulties. When we're looking at the research participants specifically, sometimes they'll be naming pictures more slowly. For example, for the Spanish-English bilinguals that were thinking mosca, and they were then having to translate that to fly, or, they're taking fly, translating it to mosca, looking at molino. Sometimes it's a little bit slower when we're thinking of like that tip of the tongue state where you're like, oh, I know that word, but I can't quite get there. Studies have shown that people who speak multiple languages experience that more often. I know that I sometimes won't remember any language, like the word for it, and I'll just be like, I know it exists, but I couldn't tell you in any of the languages. And then, as I referenced earlier, there is a constant use of control mechanisms. In order to be fluently speaking in a language, you're sort of stopping your brain from slipping in with everything else that's actively going through your mind. And that control mechanism that you're constantly flexing can get frustrating or can get a little bit tiresome when you're maybe speaking in the secondary language that you're not as comfortable with and you're sort of feeling that mental exhaustion. But there's also a ton of positives that come with linguistic competition. For example, that control mechanism that you're constantly exercising allows people to better ignore competing perceptual information and focus on relevant aspects of input, which is a direct quote from the Mariani reading. But I think it's really amazing how you're able to harness something that could be a weakness and then turn it into a strength. And it doesn't just mean you're able to ignore different language distractions within your mind. It can also be in the workplace. It's also shown to be better at switching between two tasks. That's the same thing. You're exercising your control mechanism. And same with conflict management. Another awesome thing that I found really interesting is creativity, because the same way that a Spanish bilingual will tie fly to windmill, all of those connections exist in super different ways across languages, and having more people who are able to make these fascinating connections lead to more creative teams. Which brings me to culture and cross-cultural communication. I wanted to ask you guys, beyond the points that I have here, is there any elements of culture that you guys feel really important to be represented when you're talking with people or when you're communicating? Are there any traditions that you like to hold on to or details that your families do? Yeah, Andrew?
I think one that comes up a lot is food, especially more Asian breakfast, usually lean towards more the savory side and no sweet at all. But I think to Native American people, that seems kind of crazy. Where they have cereal and French toast and stuff like that.
For sure. Okay. So diving in a little bit onto what cross-cultural communication is, the University of Berkeley has a really succinct definition, which is it's how people from different cultural backgrounds adjust to improve communication. And I thought it was really appropriate in a school that has such a large international undergraduate population and such a large and diverse undergraduate population in general to be able to recognize the various different elements that impact our communication styles, the way that we consider other people and how they consider us, and why cross-cultural communication is so essential moving forward. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the common reasons for communication breakdowns in a cross-cultural teamwork setting. The first one that the University of Berkeley pointed out in their article is linguistic prejudice. So this is basically prejudice against how someone talks. Andrew mentioned it a little bit about bias towards accents and towards fluency in a second language. I know that in the tutoring room, sometimes I'll get a student who speaks a different first language, maybe Spanish, and they're coming to me initially with the problem that they really want to sort of hide or bury their accent. And it's sort of that question that you had of do we want to be assimilating or not? And I think that the existence of linguistic prejudice is what feeds the idea that you can't be clear in your accent. And so I like to remind people who come to me with that problem of I can perfectly understand you. The question isn't your pronunciation, the question is people are being prejudiced. So how can we practice to make you feel more comfortable speaking rather than making biased people feel more righteous in their mainstream English? And that sort of highlights the idea of it undermining someone's confidence. If you're in a team, you do not want to be someone who's constantly tearing down or criticizing tiny little bits about someone's accent. That's just not going to build a healthy workplace environment. Next up is cultural insensitivity. In that same vein, it's insensitivity or misunderstandings of someone's culture. And I want to think more specifically when we misunderstand an element of someone's culture thinking it could be insulting when they meant it actually to be a polite gesture. We have so many different cultures here, and I know that what some things are considered normal by Spaniards, like being really loud in restaurants and constantly hugging and touching people, can be really rude to other people. And being able to recognize that and communicate with someone who has different beliefs on what is positive communication and what is negative communication is really essential. And then finally, judgment. A lot of people have an idea of what is the right or wrong way to communicate rooted in their culture or what their parents taught them or what countries, like what people in their country usually do. I know that I thought that communication had to be strong and you had to always prove that you were right because that's what my grandparents did in that sort of Spanish culture. It's like be loud and prove that you're right by debating. And some people find that really rude. So being able to work on that is really important. And that's why I sort of have some tips for communication that I think work both if you're an international student and you're wanting to learn more about how American culture works, but then also if you're American and you find yourself feeling like you're not getting along with international student cultures or something's not clicking. These are some things that I've found working at the ISO that really help me communicate and understand people better. First off is recognition of different people's cultures and upbringings. It's really strong that we have such a diverse community, and it's really amazing that we can learn new people's cultures, new people's way of communication in these 4 short years as undergraduates. And that sort of ties into having a team mindset. If you're working with someone regularly, whether it's a group project or whether you're a coworker, remembering that you guys have a shared goal, and yes, maybe your cultural upbringings make it so your goals are aligned differently and maybe they're prioritizing one thing because they were taught to prioritize one thing and you want to focus on another thing. Realizing that we have a common end goal, even if we disagree on where we're going to go, that's still unifying is really important. Asking questions, I think, is also really essential. If something causes conflict, someone might say something that you misunderstood or found disrespectful, being able to approach them and create that open environment of like, hey, I feel hurt, or hey, I don't understand you, is creating a really, really open channel of communication that can really strengthen the team that you're in. The same with identifying shared traits. When you have those sort of breakdowns in communication, knowing that there's a foundation of, okay, we both really like this show, or we both really like this music, and being able to know that there is a basis of trust there, or at least a basis of communication there, is really great for future teamwork and the possibility of needing to have tougher conversations. And I think something that's really difficult that I found sometimes, and I know that a lot of people I've worked with find, is accepting fault. Sometimes we're not the ones getting hurt by misunderstandings, sometimes we're the ones producing it. And being able to recognize, okay, we've misunderstood this, or we said something that was really disrespectful to them, how can I recognize that? Show them that that wasn't my intention, and then move forward is really important, and it creates a safe work environment, not just for the team you're currently in, but for who you're going to be as a professional in the future. And then finally, I say it in the tutoring room, and I'll say it now, being yourself is the most essential part of being an effective and collaborative communicator. Wanting to change your accent or wanting to hide some of your cultural perspectives because you don't think it will be accepted in different communities or in different workspaces is not comfortable, and it will eventually wear down on you. Being able to focus on who you are and what you value is really important, and then being able to use those other tips to create a sense shared of trust and a safe environment is, I think, the golden rule when it comes to cross-cultural collaboration. So, I have an activity. If y'all are up for it, we can do it. If not, y'all can do it on your own with a partner. But basically, I thought it could be really great for us to work on those tips and apply them to a scenario that we've been in the past. So think about a time that you felt a breakdown in communication. What factors were at play? What was the source of conflict? And then speak to a partner about it or in a little group and give a brief summary of that. And what tips for cross-cultural communication do you think could have helped address the situation? And then after that, have your partner or another person in your group repeat it back to prove that they're listening to you so you can rehear it and so you guys can practice feeling listened and understood and being able to work on that sort of communication element. And then you guys can switch and we can have a group discussion. If y'all are comfortable with it, if not, we can call it a day. But yeah, I don't know. Y'all good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, 5 minutes. Woo!
I feel like you have an experience. Especially like with examples I feel like for me, I actually have like sometimes my parents are like immigrants, so sometimes I'm not in the house because I'm not a family dinner. And kind of like what Howard talks about, my brother, your brain already like stuff I was that when I hold sometimes like actual different out and that brain is like when I'm like trying to say and that was like something that was like it's different anxiety and so like long time and I feel like really being in an environment that was open to say but it was really helped me feel more confident in myself and I noticed that like with that confidence was a decrease of the time that I would actually having a different so it really shows that difference of how like it was really my anxiety is not with it I don't have the confidence and back with it just being lessons with the confidence I've gained it's really been like
Y'all haven't already, switch and do the next person and then we can come together in 2 minutes.
Is there anything that
I didn't do that, but then I feel like I could have phrased it because like it was
When you knew it was hurting them, you had to.
because I still thought it was I think it is the most efficient way of saying it.
It's like the mindfulness that you guys are all in it when you go home and you don't live there anymore, but your stuff lives there, but you don't live there. And it is like, it's different. I feel like parents don't quite get it in you, don't feel like you have a place. And I think part of it is feeling, this is what I thought when I was first in college, that you don't have any of this that is like yours, that you live here. And so that you sort of take that out. At least I took it out of my parents, and I took it out of my house.
I would say like that was probably really fun experience. It wasn't mine. I don't really mind. I just
Okay, if we can wrap up our final thoughts and come together as a group. I'd love to hear from you guys sort of what points did you think showed reflection, what tips did you find, maybe give us the scenario, just sort of a little bit of a group reflection.
Lillian volunteers. No, my baby is volunteering me. What's happening?
Go for it.
Briefly. The first time that I was home for a long period of time after starting college, I was talking to my parents about how like I don't live there anymore, and that meant something different to me than it did to them, and caused a bit of conflict in like the weight of that phrase, and that we were like approaching that conversation with different like definitions of that.
And what sort of strategies of communication do you think were effective there that you wish you would have used?
Like taking the time to clarify how we were each interpreting that phrase and like what that meant to them versus what it means to me, and then maybe using a different choice of words to have the same conversation so that it wasn't as upsetting for them.
I definitely agree. Intent can mean a lot to one person, but at the end of the day, the repercussions of your words have to be recognized in order to reform that trust and bond. I mean, like your parents love you, so it's a little different, but to apply it to a teamwork setting, definitely those kinds of misunderstandings need a level of communication that can be uncomfortable. Is there anyone else that'd like to share a little bit?
Sure, I'll share something. So I was reflecting on how education itself it may push us to standardize our speech, right, or our grammar, for instance, our dialect. And I feel like that might be bad in some ways, right, as both of you have touched on, but it might also be okay or good, because a lot of my communication breakdowns from my past, I think, come from like my childhood when I was very frustrated that I couldn't articulate myself, or I said something that was misinterpreted. But now that I feel like I have more vocabulary, I can avoid those communication breakdowns as a result of education. I don't know, just throwing that out.
I totally see that point, that idea of your words being misconstrued because you guys are coming from different places of like education. But then part of me is also like the barrier of entry to be able to reach that level of education and communicate with your peers and they all match that is sort of, it's a narrow window. Like some of my coworkers in like my internship, if I started using like the vocabulary that I wanted to express how I'm feeling, I feel like that would shut them down and we wouldn't have as productive of a conversation. So in academia, I can definitely see where conflict breakdown would be like diminished through that, but I think in the wider world, being able to create sort of those simple, easy tips of responsibility and open-mindedness is the first step. But I really like that because it's true. That anger you have as a child when someone doesn't understand.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the context. I totally agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
I think like just to bounce off that, I think what comes to mind for me is the importance and access to academia, specifically like, you know, in both of these categories of like grammatical stuff and, you know, actual like linguistic discrimination. Because like the example that Zach just gave, you know, showed like how that would feel as like someone from a younger age, right? And like those are feelings that maybe now we can kind of understand and analyze, but earlier on that might not have been the case. So then you get those frustrations and everything. But I also see like a parallel with my own parents. Like my dad, he had a really big struggle with trying to speak English. And he had those frustrations as a man in his 40s, right? And like trying to like navigate that with you know, also trying to be in a professional setting and be understood and not being understood, right, is like a different type of frustration that I can only imagine because I haven't personally felt that. And I think it's really interesting because from my dad's perspective, right, he didn't want to fit the assimilation, but just as Zach mentioned, he didn't want to have that misinterpretation. And the only thing that was missing was his access to education of English, right? So he never was able to actually go to any high school in English and get to finish his own high school education and stuff. So it was really interesting to see that how he really did value that information of grammatical, you know, academics in English because he knew it really would help him, you know, just navigate the situation better. So I think definitely both those come into play because he didn't want to diminish his accent. He just wanted to say things, you know, the way that he meant them, right? So I think I really do see that intertwined right there, and it is complex.
So I think it occurred to me a moment ago. I think, so I sometimes have students who they write papers, they come to see me during office hours, and sometimes they try to express their ideas really formally. Right? They want to talk like an educated, you know, professor or something like that, and sometimes it's better to just cut to the chase and drop the formalities and just tell me what you're thinking in as simple way as you possibly can. So I guess in some ways I sometimes worry that you have an opposite effect, because some students they're feeling the pressure to like adapt to the environment with they're using fancy vocabulary and their syntax is really elaborate. And that seems to impede communication sometimes. It makes it harder to understand better. They just spoke the way they do to their friends.
Thank y'all so much for sharing. You guys provided insights that I hadn't even thought about when it comes to communication. I'm just going to do a quick wrap up on multilingualism and communication. So multilingualism is a strength. I know that in this current environment, sometimes it can really feel stigmatizing to, I don't know, at least for me, have a Hispanic family and speak Spanish at home. Sometimes when I go down to the South, it feels not great. But knowing and recognizing that bilingualism is amazing, and not just when it's a white person who speaks Russian or something, is really cool. And then it brings new perspectives to the table, and that cross-cultural communication can help mitigate some of the frustrations you can feel when it comes to that sort of control mechanism and linguistic competition that you're dealing with. And then communication requires understanding, giving others the benefit of a doubt. Some people might not be well-intentioned and they might be perfectly being biased on purpose, but a lot of people are saying things because that's what they're used to, and they've never considered that their words might have unintended meanings that people interpret. So working as a team rather than competitors is huge, and I've always thought that collaboration is the foundation of productive communication. You can learn healthy ways of communication through other people. And I don't think that the learning stops when you get out of college or when you find a good job. So sort of being able to work on your active listening and on your receptiveness to other people's thoughts and how they communicate, I think is really helpful. And then when in doubt, ask. People love to talk about their culture, and if you don't understand something, or if you thought something they did was with poor intentions, asking and figuring that out can be really enlightening and really connect you to in a way that might have not happened if you hadn't asked those questions. So that's a little bit about my presentation. How to visit the Speaking Fellows. They've talked about it before. We do everything. You can come for anything. You can be a graduate student. You can be an undergrad. We're here to help with interviews, presentations, conversation practice, anything. These are our hours. You can come at any stage of the writing process. You can come not even knowing what job you want to apply for, and we'll figure something out. And then conversation practice would be cool to do. We have headbands, and we're located on this floor down that tunnel when you're heading to the bathroom. So thank y'all so much. I hope y'all have a wonderful evening. We want to do a quick little Q&A session, so if I can have Andrew and Caro both up here together. If you guys have any questions, this is the time to ask them. So yeah, if there's any questions, go ahead.
I had a question. I don't know if anyone remembers this. This is I get older, the students stay the same age, so my cultural references are quickly out of date. But in 2016, during the presidential elections, there was a bit on the Daily Show. Hillary Clinton was giving a talk somewhere way in the South, and she kind of adapted a Southern accent. She had a really strong Southern drawl, and many people found that to be kind of problematic. It sounds like she was trying to manipulate her audience by imitating the way that they speak. So my question for Andrew was, so it sounds like you were talking about cases where it's morally permissible for someone to adopt the accent of the dominant culture that they're a part of. On the other hand, there do seem to be cases where that might be problematic, right? So the example I came up with is the one with Hillary Clinton. So I'm just kind of curious what you thought about that case, or those cases in general.
Kamala Harris was criticized for that too.
Yeah.
In this most recent cycle, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's a good question. If you think about it. I think it's just really complex because I think there's always historical implications for it. And I think with the example you gave of Hillary Clinton doing the Southern accent, I think that's more on the problematic side because it's just kind of like an intentionally manipulative one that also, I believe it's not her identity. It's like, am I right with that? Like, it's just one she adopted outside of like just to come to the environment.
So I guess I raised that point because if it's problematic for Hillary to feign an accent in order to like make her audience more comfortable with her, why would it be problematic for, in general, to do something like that? So what distinguishes cases where you're going to an interview and you know that there are these biases? So to kind of get around those biases, you kind of adopt the accent of whoever you're speaking to. That sounds like is okay, right? Yeah. But it wouldn't be okay, or it seems to be more problematic for someone like Hillary Clinton or maybe Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, it's an open.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think now that like you've articulated the question even more, I also think it's supporting my point of like even assimilating to like white mainstream English for an interview should be problematic. It's just we don't perceive it as such because that's just the norm we have right now. I think also it comes out of a place of more people less privileged being able to access more privileged areas because of this assimilation that allows it to be less problematic per se. But I still think there's still the root of this being problematic because, and at the end of the day, people are being kind of adopting something they're truly not in order to get something out of someone else, which is not good.
Well, I was just gonna add like onto that question about like adopting accents. That to me it feels like there's a difference in like power dynamics between like immigrants trying to assimilate their accents to like the mainstream in order to like succeed and like survive, versus like a more like a different example would be like white Americans like copying like black accents and stuff like that. Like I took what's it called? I took sociolinguistics here, and something that's really important about sociolinguistics is like the idea that the way you speak can be a communication of who you are to people. Whether that's like what you think about yourself or like what you want others to think about you. So I think some of the complications of like when is it okay to take to like adopt an accent versus like not, they can be heavily affected by like power dynamics.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Like something I always thought of, like especially since starting college, is like a lot of people are like sometimes like in a joking manner in casual conversation, it's like adopt like an Italian or like any other European accent, and that's like not problematic to most people here. But if someone starts adopting like an Asian accent or a black accent, that's definitely seen as more problematic by the general population. And I think it has to do with like those power dynamics you mentioned. So yeah, it's really good point.
Like what can be an oppressor and what can be oppressed. Like white people cannot be oppressed because they are the majority. Mm-hmm. So it is like in the power hierarchy. You know, there cannot be racism against white people because they are not the minority.
I would also raise though that class is huge because I'm thinking back on Southern accent. When I'm down in North Carolina, I'll have a Southern accent because that's what I was raised with. But when I come here, New York, it's almost like there is very much class dynamics of like the wealthier New Englanders versus like poor mid-Atlantic Southern. And I think that not just along white lines, like white and black, but then also class and all the different socioeconomic conditions we find ourselves in. There are things that everyone sort of wants to suppress within themselves, and that's why code switching is so common. So the question is, are you moving down the ladder of power, or are you moving up? And that's why Hillary Clinton was so problematic.
That's really interesting.
But I saw a few other points in there.
This might be more of a question for you. Did you take thesis 152 last semester? Or in the past?
Did I take what, sorry?
BCS 152.
I haven't taken a single linguistics class.
It's a psycholinguistics class. It's listed as like a bunch of different, which covers like the topic that you were talking about, like language acquisition quantitative sciences.
Okay.
Field. But I guess when you brought up your point, one of you, somewhere over here, about being frustrated as a child to, like, when trying to get your point across, do you guys think that this concept of, like, linguistic justice or linguistic prejudice also applies along, like, age lines as well? Just as, because how, like, children are seen as, like, less intelligent and, like, a different class of person because of age.
I'll say along a public health perspective, we were recently talking about this in my community engagement course. They say that studies have shown that Black boys are viewed as older across the board. Like they'll be like 5 and being treated like they're 10. And that very much, I think, has an intersection with speech and education and sort of the idea that like you can't escape certain things even if you want to assimilate. But I started speaking and I don't know how I want to wrap it up.
I actually want to complicate that a little bit. 'Cause I was really struck at Andrew's presentation by the moment when your mom said that when you guys were kids, you made fun of her for the way that she said dark chocolate and something else.
Yeah, like she says duck instead of dark and tower instead of towel.
And I thought that was interesting that we think of children as in like a less privileged position and sort of they're frustrated because they can't articulate it. But here you have this different dynamic where the children of immigrants are more successful at assimilating the native language, and so they have like a power dynamic over their parents, right?
For sure.
And so I was wondering how it feels to hear that now, and like how you sort of look back on that relationship.
I guess like it never really stood out to me when she said that because it's like been kind of a constant joke throughout her upbringing. But I think when doing your exercise, I also thought like I've had moments with my parents where we're potentially arguing or just conversing, or like stop using your fancy language and stuff like that, or they think I'm intentionally using it to confuse them, but that's not really the case. I'm just like I was a thesaurus kid, like that's just how I talk. But I was like, oh, maybe I should be more mindful of toning it down for them. But I don't know. I think it is interesting that I'm like I've always been seen from my parents as like, oh, like better at English, or kind of like I teach them English sometimes too, or just like we're watching a show together, like, oh, what does that word mean? I'm like, oh, it's this one. So it is a really interesting dynamic. And I guess to add on to your question too, I think for differences in age, I don't know actually, because I think like I've always seen how like talking to kids just as acting like they're adults with just less knowledge has been more effective. I'm also a 21-year-old guy who doesn't have any children, so I don't have experience with that. But I always have seen, you know, in personal experience how like talking to children just as you would an adult is more effective instead of kind of patronizing them. But yeah, that's just my take on that.
That question got me messed up, Amy. Now I'm thinking about it. I'm gonna have to call my mom and apologize. Oh. But yeah.
To add to kind of like jump off your point, I had a very similar experience growing up. Since my parents are both also immigrants and first generation like English first language speaker, I guess. Have you, during like your research or like your research into this topic, have you ever looked at, is there material that's about like the children of like immigrant parents being the translators for their families, and like kind of how that dynamic works?
Actually,
like my dad asked me to like, does this text look good? Like, can I send this email? Like stuff like
that's
that.
what, because I've like been like a ghostwriter for my parents for stuff, or like for like my dad's LinkedIn, he's like, oh, look at this, please. I will say I actually haven't found any information on that. I did look for it. I think one thing that stood out to me for linguistic justice is like even like April Baker-Bell's text, or that like kind of pioneers, that's from 2020. Like all these sources I found were like as early as 2019. So I think something about linguistic justice and how it's a very recent and still mostly acceptable discrimination in America leads us to have not a lot of exploration or like official research on it. So, but that's something we should definitely try working on.
I think this brings up like a good point of like the exciting time that we're in right now, because like I think a parallel with that of why we're not seeing like that research is because like we are that generation of those, you know, like immigrant families who like
have now that access to higher education, and like, you know, we're the people starting these conversations, and they weren't happening before, right? Especially because our parents weren't able to just have those conversations in this language, right? Because it's not that, right? Our parents don't understand this, you know, especially as the ones that really a lot of times had, you know, that personal experience with it, right? And I feel like that is what's like so exciting to see, having Andrew and Caro talk about these subjects, right? Like, and just even having this open debate about it as well, because it goes to show, like, you know, these are the first conversations that are happening, and they can help really impact the way that these conversations continue to go and the awareness that spreads with them. Thank you, Juliana. Thank you all so much for coming. It's 33, so we want to respect your time. But
Actually, it's not new. One of my favorite history books, Immigrant Women in the Land of Dollars, explores early Jewish and Italian immigrants in New York City. And a major chapter is about the generational tension. Because the younger, yeah, exactly. But they're children. And because they're children, and they're like, so